إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أما بعد. Through looking at the Quran and the Ahadith, we're taught there are two different types of rights that can be separated from them. We have huququllah, or the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have huquq al-ibad, or huquq al-adamiyya, or the rights of the people, the rights of humanity. And so, huququllah, the conditions for those that have transgressed the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to seek tawbah and sincere forgiveness from Him. But what about huquq al-ibad, or the rights of mankind and the rights of the people, who if you transgress or pass it, how do you seek forgiveness? How do you go back from it? And so the only way to attain the forgiveness of those who have been oppressed, of those who have been wronged, of those who have been zalim, those who have been transgressed, is to seek their forgiveness and to have them abstain you from what you have done to them, the rights that you have taken from them, to return the rights that you have taken. And so, thinking of this, of the huququllah wa huquq al-ibad, we can think of this as an example of a house. In Islam, we have the idea of pillars through many different ways, the pillars of faith and the pillars of our actions. We have the 5 pillars of Islam being ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. You have the salah, you have the zakat, the sawm, and hajj. So those make up, if you think of it as a house, 4 pillars and 1 pillar in the center. And in the Sharia, we have similarly 4 pillars that are necessary for the rights. The first one is ibadat, or the actions that you complete, that be salah, zakat. All of those 5 pillars are ibadat that we have in Islam. They all fall under this first pillar of Sharia because they're an action, and that these have to be done with ikhlas. You cannot do them to anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the biggest part of our aqeedah. But then the other 3 pillars are the huquq al-ibad. They're the rights of the people, so they are separate from huququllah. So the second one is mu'amalat, or that's dealings. So if you were to make a trade with someone, you make an agreement, you sign a contract, that's where it would fall under. The third is mu'ashara, or the family background. So what are your dealings with your family? The honor to children, to the parents. How do you treat the relatives whenever people pass away? What do you do with them whenever they're related to you, and so on. And finally, the fourth one is akhlaq, or the manners that we treat people with. And so how do you deal with one another? How do you interact? What do you say? How do you represent yourself outside to others and to the society? And so these principles extend further as well, beyond humanity. These, especially the fourth with akhlaq, extends to all living things, so animals, plants, anything like that. And these apply overall. And so why this is important is because we have a lot of things either going on in the world or coming up with time, given that the month of Ramadan is approaching and that the situation in Gaza is still going on. It's important to look at huquq al-ibad, or the rights of the people. How do you avoid oppressing people ahead of the month and throughout your life? So an example of this is given in Surah Al-Hujurat, where we can contrast this with an example from huququllah. So let's say you see a brother who happens to have a drinking problem, he's an alcoholic. You know that the people around him will look at him with this look of wrongness, that they will look down upon him for this action. But at the end of the day, that only harms himself, and that is for huququllah. So that is something with the rights of Allah that he has to come clean and repent to Allah for. But why don't we look at that with the same action, like we mentioned, like in Surah Al-Hujurat, something like backbiting, where in Surah Al-Hujurat, in verse 12, قال الله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. O you who believe, avoid much suspicion. Indeed, some suspicions are sins. And do not spy on one another or backbite. Will any of you love to eat the flesh of his dead brother? You would hate it. Be wary of Allah. Indeed, Allah is all clement, all merciful. And so, this shows that the rights of the people can have severe consequences. And this is something that we see as simple, like through day to day, when you're telling a story or you're talking to your friends, you may talk about someone without even thinking about it, and you just backbited on your brother or sister. And the punishment for this, for it to be forgiven, is to seek the forgiveness of the person you spoke about. And so this is sometimes seen as something very light that people do not think about whenever they're just talking or they're mentioning. But in that hadith is narrated from Abu Hurairah that Rasulullah ﷺ said, on the Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of resurrection, the rights will be paid to those to whom they are due, so much so that a hornless sheep will be retaliated for by punishing the horned sheep which broke its horns. Sahih Muslim. So this is saying that even the animals on Yawm al-Qiyamah will get their rights. So saying that a sheep that had its horns broken by another sheep will get its recompense on that day. So what about us? What do we do day to day where we could be overstepping the boundaries of people? And so I want to bring this as well to the situation in Gaza. And so we all know by now everything that's going on in Gaza. And the question comes is, what is our responsibility here in Chicago? What could we do for them in Palestine? And rather, what if we don't do anything? What's going to be asked of us? And this is a very humanitarian perspective to look at it that Islam provides, where we're all viewed as one ummah, where if one part is hurting, the rest of the ummah is hurting. And so on Yawm al-Qiyamah, this is something that comes with the rights of the people. The people of Gaza are our Muslim brothers and sisters, and they deserve the same rights that your family here and your friends and your relatives here would have, which is that we have to keep mentioning about it, bringing it up, talking about it, and trying to fight for their rights as if they were our own family, because they have that right upon us. And we're going to be asked about that on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Just like the hadith mentions, those who choose to be heedless, those who choose not to pay attention to their rights that they have upon others and those that have rights upon them, they will be paid eventually. So if you choose to do nothing, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make sure that you, being that you are aware of what's going on, that you did what you were supposed to do. And there's many ways that this can be done, and inshallah I'll go more into it in the second khutbah between this and Ramadan. But soon after, inshallah, within about 2 weeks or so, we're going to come upon the month of Ramadan. And this is a month of maghfirah, a month of forgiveness, a month of rahmah, where all the doors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah are open for anyone who wants to take them. And that every night people are forgiven and removed from the hellfire. And one of the most important things, as mentioned in the 4 pillars, so going back to it, you have the first one, which is ibadat, which is usually what people engage in. They'll be reading the Quran more, they'll be going to the masajid, they'll be doing tarawih, they'll be sitting with the people. That's ibadat. So that only affects you as the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He has upon you and your soul. That helps you. But what about the other three? So mu'amalat, what we see as dealings, business and work, the rights of the people come involved with that in Ramadan, with you being truthful with them, with you providing full service for what you're doing, and as well tying back in to what's going on in Gaza with here and with akhlaq, is that your dealings, whether the money that you make or what you do with those, being that it's halal, planning to set aside more of that for those who need it more. Especially now, given that in the West Bank and in Gaza, they're almost completely out of bread. So setting aside money for food for those who are there. People who are now packaging dates to send there, there's programs for that as well before Ramadan to help with. Mu'asharat is, as I mentioned, the family background is the honor that you show to your family, to your relatives, to those around you. And during Ramadan, while we're fasting, sometimes we get very impatient, sometimes we get very hasty, sometimes we may say things that we may not mean, but it still hurts the other person. And keeping an eye on that and being very careful with what you say to people, how you interact with them, spending more time with your family and your relatives and those who you love around you is very important for the rights of the people. And lastly, and most important, is akhlaq. And so your manners and the way you carry yourself as a Muslim in Ramadan is incredibly important, because حقوق الآدمية or حقوق العباد, as the rights of the people, extends beyond Muslims. So it's not just how you interact with your Muslim brothers and sisters, but also how you interact with everyone, regardless if they're Muslim or not. So how you represent yourself and the manners you show to people, regardless of their background, is incredibly important and can increase the ajr you get in Ramadan. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فلسائر المسلمين استغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا كما أمر والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So to wrap this up, the main points I'm mentioning is that you got two rights. You got حقوق Allah, which is the rights Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has upon you as one of His creation, and حقوق العباد or حقوق الآدمية, or the rights that humanity and people around you have upon you. And the main reasons why I wanted to bring this up is because Ramadan is a little over 2 weeks away, and because the situation in Palestine is getting worse. Even though there may be a temporary ceasefire, it does not mean that the situation is getting better. And in fact, now more than ever, they need your help, whether that be speaking out, whether that be calling your representatives, whether that be sending money, whether that be actions throughout the city or in the country. But doing what you can and having those rights upon them from you delivered. As well, the 4 pillars of Sharia all come in hand with Ramadan and throughout your life, everything like that, when delivering these rights of the people. So making sure that people are not overstepped in the way that you deal with them, in your manners with them, and how you interact with them. And how you represent yourself and how you carry yourself is not important, again, just for Muslims, but also for the non-Muslims. Because Ramadan, being a month of maghfirah, being a month of mercy, can be a great month to represent yourself as a role model to those around you. Because you don't know what little action you may do to represent where someone feels that they're seen, that their rights are there, that you're not overstepping their boundaries. And that may bring them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to all help us to keep the rights of the people and keep us all within the righteous. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا معهم عباد الله اتقوا الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروا الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين استغفروه وأقم الصلاة